Alright kids, let me tell you a story. So not that far from where I'm sitting is a big fucking structure on top of a mountain. And it's built out of these fantastic stones that were taken from that mountain. And it is built almost directly on top of a Mesolithic or Neolithic, some sort of Stone Age burial ground. Now I don't know if it's built out of the actual stones that were used for that burial tomb, or if it's built out of some sort of other stone and it's just built directly on top of it, but whatever the case, it is not the original building. It is not the original Hellfire Club, and it gets its name from the fact that the original burned down. And that's a fun story, so let me tell you. You see, back in the day, the original Hellfire Club was built to be this hunting lodge. Basically, all the big rich people would go up there for the weekend or however long they felt like. It might have been owned by a guy called Speaker Connolly, or he definitely frequented it quite a lot. But basically, they'd all go up there on their horses with their guns and their foxes and their dogs and all this kind of thing. And they would shoot animals and they'd have a great time. Well, one time, there was about 4 or 5 of them up there, and they were sitting down after a long day of hunting. Very, very tired, and they're passing the bottle around, having the laughs, playing cards, let's say poker or something like that, right? There's about 4 of them, and we won't give them names, but they were all sitting up here, you know, getting away from their wives, having a gas weekend, chatting about the day. Oh, do you remember that big, well, I guess they'd be posh, wouldn't they? So, do you remember that big buck that you shot the other day? And all this kind of shit. Because, of course, this was during a time when Ireland was mostly owned by the fucking Brits. Or at the very least, you wouldn't have land unless you were a West Brit. Which, if you're familiar with that phrase, 10 points. Anyway, this particular night, it was very, very cold. Very, very rainy. You'd be glad to be inside. And they had this beautiful fire sitting in the hearth, just like I've got here. But of course, it's all well contained. Everything was lit by fire back then. So they got their fire, a couple of paraffin lamps around the place. And they're just sitting down, playing cards, having a gas old time. When they hear a big fucking knock at the door. Now, it was a much bigger and heavier door than that, but you're going to have to imagine. Now they're wondering who would be up the top of a mountain at this time of night in this kind of weather, but of course there are rules of hospitality in Ireland. You have to accept a person into your house if they ask you for hospitality. You have to feed them. You have to give them a place to sleep. And similarly, there are rules for if you're a guest. One of my favourites is actually you have to offer food 3 times, and if you are the guest, you have to refuse the food that is offered to you 3 times, before either party is allowed to either accept or decline, which is very nice. I like that's fun. You know, it's completely useless, but it's funny. Anyway, the 3 of them, the 4 of them, the however many, they all get up and they go to the door, or at least 1 or 2 of them do. You know, they're on the bottle, and there's a couple of rickety, not necessarily rickety, but uneven stairs on the way there. So, you know, you don't want to risk that. So they take their lamp, and they go down to the door. And they open it up, and they see this old man. Poor old fella. He's got a little beard, like my one, and his mustache. He's wearing this big hat, which covers quite a lot of his head. It's almost like a wizard hat. It's got this very wide brim. He's got this big, heavy coat on him. And honestly, the coat and whatever, you know, maybe a great coat and then a trench coat over the top of it, or whatever's going on, the coat makes him look like twice the size he is. You can tell he's a bit of a scrawny fella. He looks like he hasn't eaten in a little while. He's come all the way up this mountain. He's been out in the rain. He's like a soaked rat, you know. He does not look very well. And they open the door and he asks them, "Lads, would you have any sort of room for the night? You know, could I stay with you? It's a long way to me home, and I don't want to be, you know, making the walk. It's very, very far. Could I just come on in? And would you have the decency to have a little bit of hospitality for me?" They're all like, yeah, of course, man, of course. "No problem, come on in, we're playing cards, you can come in and join us." So the stranger comes on in, they all go into the room where everybody was sitting. They got the lovely warm fire, and he hangs his coat up there, and they can see that he definitely is a much scrawnier fella than he looks like with that big heavy coat on. He hangs, well, he keeps the hat on actually, which is a little bit strange, but whatever. I'm after telling this wrong. No, sorry. He keeps the coat on as well. He keeps his coat and his hat on, and he keeps it all wrapped up, even though he's now in the warmth. Sorry, I'm misremembering here. Anyway, he keeps himself very wrapped up, tight, against whatever, even though the rest of him would be sweltering. You know, it's very well insulated, these thick stone walls are, so you don't need much clothes. Anyway, they all sit down and they start playing a couple of games, right? Let's say poker, just for the sake of it, but I don't know what they would have played back then. I don't know if pontoons was in style, or maybe they're playing switch or something, I don't know. But let's say poker, just for the sake of it. And they're sitting there playing their games, and they deal this new fella in. They give him a sup of brandy or scotch or whiskey or whatever they might have been drinking. Actually, I know what they've been drinking. There was a whole song about this. I had a friend who, I think it was the Taxpayers or someone, he talked to them on Patreon and he got them to write a song about this. They used to drink melted butter mixed with whiskey. So there you go, little fun fact. That's what they used to drink. So they give them the butter and the whiskey. And they're all sitting down and having a laugh and having a game. And they start to notice after a couple of rounds that this new fella is very, very good at poker. He seems to be beating them every single time. Now these are rich landlords who are out on the hunt. They don't appreciate that. So they start concocting this plan to get even with him. They're looking at one another, and they've been, you know, friends for a while, so they all know what the other person is thinking. And a sly nod goes out, and yeah, we're cheating. Okay. So, after a couple of rounds, so as not to raise suspicion, one of the guys drops his card. Oh, sorry about that. Here, I'll bend down perfectly innocently out of your line of sight and pick that up. Now he's planning on swapping the card out or whatever it might be, but when he's down there, he sees the man's feet, which, even though he has this big heavy hat on, the big heavy coat on, his feet are sticking out the bottom of the coat. Now, he's barefoot, which is not that strange for the time and for the location, but what is strange is that his feet aren't feet at all. They're hooves. Cloven hooves. And sticking out of the bottom of his coat is a little pointy tail. Now, of course, that's very, very suspicious. And the fella who bent down to see it knows exactly what that means straight away. He goes fucking pale white, like a ghost, Mark Tybshit, like a sheet. And it's almost instinctive. It's almost instant. It's insane how quickly this man knows. But the newcomer, the stranger with the cloven hooves, it's like he instantly knew what this guy was looking at and what has just happened. He throws the table up. He doesn't flip it. He doesn't throw it aside. He doesn't spill everything everywhere. No, he throws that thing. It turns about 8 times in just the quick time it takes for that thing to reach the ceiling. And when it does, it bursts into a brilliant blue flame. And the entire place, even though it's mostly made of stone, that entire building caught fire instantly. The entire place was fucking engulfed in this brilliant blue fire. And these 4 or 5, however many people, were sitting there dumbstruck. 2 or 3 seconds it takes them to get their wits about them and realize, shit, we have got to get out of here. And they start running for the door. But what they notice is, this stranger, he's already there. He's already out the door. He's already halfway down the fucking mountain. He is running like nobody's business, faster than anybody thought was even possible. By the time they make it to their front step, they can see him bolting down that mountain, and they try to chase him, but of course they're not going to catch up. They make it to the top of the hill, and they can look down all the way into the valley, where he's about to disappear into Massey's Wood, which is the forest at the bottom of that hill, at the bottom of that particular peak. I've spent a couple of nights in Massey's Wood, and it always feels like there's eyes on you. It always feels like you're not alone. Anyway, they're looking down into this valley, Now, normally you wouldn't be able to see anything, but of course they've got the light of their flaming, fiery building behind them, and the rain is doing nothing against it. The wind ripping up the flames, making it even hotter. I don't know how much you know about physics, but as soon as that wind starts going, the flames will pick up because they've got all this oxygen to feed off. The three things they need, three things fire needs, is fuel, which it had plenty of, or you wouldn't think it had plenty of because it's a mostly stone building, but of course you've got all the wood in there as well, and any clothes, bed sheets, anything like that. But this fire seems to be feeding off the stones, which is very, very strange, on Ashtok. So it's got plenty of fuel, as well as that wind is going, it's got plenty of air, and it's creating its own heat, so it is going. You can hear the sizzling of the rain as it just dissolves, it just evaporates before it can even hit the flames. It's ridiculous. And this brilliant blue flame which is poking through and shining right down the mountain, brighter than anything you've ever seen. I'd say you could see that fire from all over Dublin, if not all over Ireland. And maybe not down south because there's mountains in the way. But that shit was brighter than a fucking star. And by the light of that, they could see this fella running away down the mountain. I digress a little bit, but it's grand. So, they're watching him run away. Where are we? Here we go. They're watching him run away down that mountain, right? And they're thinking to themselves, how are we going to catch him? He's way too fast. We're never gonna be able to keep up with him. How's that for light? We're never going to be able to keep up with him. What do? We can't let him get away. We've just had this contact, we've just had this interaction, this meeting with the literal devil. We can't let that get away. We wouldn't be good Christian men, says they. So they look around and they're thinking, and they can see this big heavy boulder right at the top of the hill, just teetering on the edge there. So they all look at each other and they know what's going on. They scramble around and they manage to find this big heavy fucking log. I don't know, maybe it was something that you'd use to tie your horses to, maybe it was just falling off a tree, whatever the case, they found this big, heavy log and another stone. Now, they positioned the stone next to the big rock, and they shoved that log underneath it using that little, not little stone, but, you know, smaller rock as a fulcrum. More physics there for you. They use all of their weight on the end of this big, long lever, and of course that transfers the force into this big, heavy stone that could otherwise never be moved properly. But in this case, it starts to tip, because of course it was precarious. Now it tips and it starts rolling over itself all the way down the hill and goes and slap right on top of the devil, and it stays perfectly still from there. Doesn't move an inch. And as soon as that happened, within 5-6 seconds, the rain clears up. Clouds float away from the sky. The fire goes from a blue to a nice warm orange, like here. And it kind of slows down. Now it's still going because there's plenty of fuel for it. But the wind is gone. The rain is gone. But it's not feeding off the stones anymore. It's just the wood, and the hide, the fabrics, and all this kind of thing. Structural damage is irreparable, but look, I digress. The fire becomes a normal fire. And they walk down that hill, and they don't get to the bottom because, you know, it wasn't at the bottom, but about, what, 3/4 of the way down, they see it. This big stone. Dead still. Dead still. Eerily still. Now, you wouldn't expect a stone to move, would you, unless the devil was trapped under it, so there's something suspicious about it. It feels wrong. It feels like this thing has been there for centuries. And they think, holy fuck, what have we done? Is he under there? Should we try and lift it? Should we check? Would that let him loose? And they decide they're going to leave it there. And just hope that they got him. Because they didn't see it happening. But they hope they got him. And I can tell you, that stone is still there today. I sat on it as a child. I've passed it countless times. I sat on it only a couple of months ago. People pass that stone every day. And it hasn't moved since. People have even tagged it, spray painted on it. And now some people believe that the devil is still under there. I'm not a religious man, I don't know. I wouldn't make a claim one way or the other, but fuck it. I'm not about to move the thing. Are you? So believe what you want. But that's what they say. The story of the Hellfire Club. Something that my dad told me when I was only wee. And something that I tell you now. And hopefully the folklore will live on. Ihu wahanesha pashti.